It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 694. 694. I know I can say that. 694 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Now, you might tell I'm a little rusty. We've been off for a couple weeks. This is the first new episode of 2019. And I hope everyone had a safe and happy holiday season. And hopefully you're back refreshed, energized, ready to conquer 2019. I know I am. How about you? Well, to help you get the year off to a great start, we've got an excellent guest lined up for you today. Joining me on the show is Jake Dunlap. Jake is the founder and CEO of Skaled. Now, today's conversation is all about how do you reconcile and how do you balance between technology and human relationships in sales. Now, we've experienced this incredible growth in the quantity and quality of sales tools, sales technology that's available to sellers over the past few years. And it's created this sort of ongoing debate about whether sellers perhaps are relying too much on tools in place of building the necessary relationships with buyers. And after all, we all know people buy from people, not from tools. But, we need both the tools and the relationship. So what's the right balance to strike? Well, we're going to talk about that with Jake and really talk about why Jake believes we're entering the era of the buyer in B2B sales and what that will mean for the role of the salesperson, the individual seller such as you. I mean, can you continue to add more value to the buyer than a bot, for instance? I mean, that's a great question to keep in mind as you listen to our conversation today. Now, we are here at the beginning of the new sales year, and if you haven't mapped out your plan yet for how you're going to grow this year, you need to get started on that. Now, by grow, I don't mean just your sales results. I'm really referring to what has to happen first is how are you going to grow the skills, the behaviors, and the habits that will enable you to increase your sales. So I've got a tool for you to help you with this. If you come to thesaleshouse.com/sales plan, that's thesaleshouse.com/sales plan, there you can download a top-level overview of the sales plan I've successfully used personally for more than 30 years to create the effective strategies and tactics that enabled me to close hundreds of millions of dollars of orders with customers all around the world. So you want to get this, you want to download this, you want to put this to use in your selling today. So visit thesaleshouse.com/sales plan. Now, the beginning of the new sales year is also the perfect time to join the Sales House. It is, after all, the only all-in-one growth accelerator for B2B sellers. So download the sales plan overview and then go check out the Sales House. It will enable you to become the very best version of you. All right, let's jump into it with my guest today, Jake Dunlap. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Andy?
I'm doing well. Here we are, both New Yorkers, talking to each other from California locations. Me in San Diego, you in San Francisco.
That's right.
It's a fun world, isn't it?
Of course.
You're not tied to any one location. We can do this from anywhere practically. So
that's right.
Good stuff. So you're at Dreamforce this week.
That's correct. Yes.
I've managed to avoid this year. But
it's a love hate. I feel like after a few years, it turns that way, and then you're like, I kind of miss hanging out with those people.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a good time. But I was talking to somebody yesterday who was very similar to me the way they approach it. I think the only time I actually go in Salesforce is when I'm actually speaking at Salesforce.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just meetings around the periphery, which
exactly
sounds pretty much what you're doing.
That's exactly right. I will actually go into Dreamforce for the first time later today. So.
Okay. Yeah, into the main hall, which is if people haven't been, it's
definitely worth going.
A, quite an experience, and B, if you suffer from claustrophobia at all, probably not a good idea.
No, that in the subway, stay away.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we were sort of scheduled to talk today about which I think we're going to. Not to make it sound like we're going to change it, but there's this issue is, we've got this influx of technology into sales and sales automation, various forms, AI, so on and so forth. And it starts butting up against this idea of the fact that the human aspect of selling is still really paramount and central to forming a working relationship with a buyer. So it's like, how do we reconcile these? Because certainly we see examples of the ways technology are being used in sales that do nothing to further the building of a relationship, if anything. But it doesn't have to be that way. At least my way of thinking is that ultimately the end game with technology and in sales, and I wrote about this earlier this week, is it's going to be used to help us and facilitate the building of relationships and facilitate the building of trust. We're not anywhere near that yet, I think, but but let's talk about what's happening today and what might come.
Well, I think it's going to be very channel dependent, and I think a lot of the ways that teams are going to use or have to adjust their sales cycle is going to be based on the buyer's behavior. Meaning, what I will say though is that I think as we saw, kind of in B2C, where people want to go down the funnel themselves, a little further and further and further, and the way that we've orchestrated sales teams for really since the invention of the SDR role has actually been very anti that almost. It's we have to qualify you and have a meeting and do this. And I think we're kind of to that stage now where buyers want to do a little bit of their own research. Tools exist for them to do their own research. They come in more educated, and I think they just want a less friction in the buying process. And what I think that's going to mean, especially for more transactional products, companies that might sell something that's less than, let's call it $10,000 a year. What it means to be in sales for those products, I think is going to be a lot more shepherding and a lot more project management. And salespeople are going to have to be smart about the ecosystem and really serve as a guide. Whereas at the enterprise, I think we're not even close to there yet. But, I think you're seeing more and more of these, you look at tools like Drift, right, that allow me to come to a website. The bot can answer a few basic questions, which is great. And then I don't get bombarded by a sales rep because I downloaded a stupid ebook. So I think we're just kind of at this like very beginning. And I think those lower average sales price products are going to be the ones that are really affected by this. But look, we have to, as sales leaders and professionals, we have to adapt strategies that our buyers want and how our buyers want to interact with us. So, that's kind of at the top of the funnel. We can, we'll get into it later on how teams should be thinking about technology. But I'm really excited because I think we're really going to be entering into an era of the buyer where the buyers, just like when you go to buy a car or a house, the buyer has more information usually than the realtor or the car salesperson. And I think we're moving in that direction in B2B. And I think that's exciting. I think it's going to force salespeople to have to actually get smarter about the industries. And they're really only going to be able to differentiate based on their knowledge. And I think that's actually really exciting.
Well, so there's a lot in there to unpack that you talked about. And so let's just go back to the beginning a little bit. This idea of friction in a channel is one that people have written about for some time. And we've already seen many examples in the business-to-business space where salespeople are gone that previously existed. I mean, there used to be your local mom and pop office supply store used to have salespeople out calling on companies, and we don't need people to sell us pens and pencils and pads and office supplies and so on. That's an example of one relatively low dollar amount, probably $10,000-$20,000 a year. Yeah, the information's all available online. You just don't need a salesperson. And so I think, on the lower end, we're going to continue to see that trend. But I think I believe, and you touched on this, is that as we get into look at more complex B2B sales, is that I think the role of automation is that, or not the role, one of the artifacts of increased use of automation is this necessity to be human, to be authentic, to be able to form relationship actually becomes more important because the role of the human doesn't go away, but I think it becomes more concentrated in many respects.
Well, I think it's not that the role doesn't go away, but I think what we will be doing is what will be different. Meaning, if it used to be that say one of the main job of sales, right, through the demo and through other things is to educate, right? I got to educate you on what's happening, et cetera. I think when people are now I think it's going to happen at the mid-market and enterprise level. When people come to you with more information, it means what they expect from you is going to be different. I think they're going to expect less, somewhat sales things and more like genuine, like helping. And then I'm not saying like customer service, and look, in sales, there'll still need to be somebody who kind of like gently guides you toward like the right solution. But I feel like it's going to require salespeople to be smarter about their industry than maybe they've had to be before. Because before, when I came to you, I was maybe looking at one or two other people. or you came to me, kind of cold, outbound, and maybe I wasn't looking at anything. So my knowledge is very low. And I think what's going to happen if you fast forward 2, 3, 4 years from now at the enterprise level, I'm going to come in and I'm going to know these are the 4 other people. I'm going to go to G2 Crowd. I'm going to see these are the things that you do really well from
if
thousands
you're buying
of
software,
people. Yeah, for software in particular. And they're expanding into other services. Sure. And therefore, as a salesperson, you're going to have to know all this stuff too, right? Like, it's not going to be good enough to just know about your product. I think knowing about your product
hasn't it been this way already? I mean, for me, it's
hypothetically, yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, but let's talk about that because, I think customer-centric selling and solution selling, some of these books, when they've been out 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's not like this notion is really new. Now, one thing's changed. Obviously, customers have more ability to educate themselves. But even this trend, I mean, this is things we've been talking about for
totally
almost 10 years now.
Yeah, I think we've talked that the buyer has more information, right? I think HubSpot put this out. I can't even remember how long ago, but I don't think anybody really believed it. They're like, yeah, but I posted about this the other day. It's like the buyer's 75%. I just don't think that was true then. I think maybe in some purchases, because the information didn't exist. Right. They're like the amount of ebooks and industry white papers that exist today versus last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago is exponentially different. And so I think, although it's something that we've talked about, and certain sales organizations do it better than others, I think my thought and kind of what we're seeing in the market is it's just going to be required. It's not going to be like, oh, my team, it would be better if we knew about the competition. It would be better if we understood the space. No, it's going to be required, because if your team doesn't know that now, they're not going to be able to compete, because they're going to go to someone else and that other rep is going to know, yeah, that's cool. You're looking at them. Here's the things they do. Here's what we do. Here's how it works. How can I help you to buy? As opposed to like, and we're better for these 10 reasons. So I agree 100%. And it a lot of this is like the old is new again. But I think now, just because of the volume of information that exists and buyers just getting more and more comfortable getting further down the funnel in their consumer purchases and their, and other purchases, it's kind of like a storm of things that are happening for salespeople.
Yeah. I wonder, we've got all the sales enablement apps that are coming online and so on that address a lot of what you're talking about in terms of, providing more content at the right time and so on. I wonder really how big a difference that really makes, though. I mean, I think certainly to a degree that maybe it does enable salespeople to some extent. But from the buyer's perspective, it's, what are they really looking for from the salesperson these days? And so it's what they're looking for is I think what they've always looked for is, this trusted advisor role.
I agree.
And I think there's some idea on the part of people that are sort of in the sales enablement space, especially with the content-related apps, that somehow this combined with a little bit of AI, and this sort of starts taking the salesperson out of the equation to some degree. And I really don't think buyers look at it that way. I think buyers, granted, they can get more information, right? They can get more educated, but to some degree, it's like more icing on the cake. They know what they need to know in order to make a decision. What they're looking for is that nuance, that insight, that perspective that really often comes from the salesperson.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, Andy. But one thing I think I'll add or comment on is the bots will get to the point where and it's gonna happen. Like, this isn't like maybe if, like, it is going to happen. Like, bots can already. I mean, I think what really opened people's eyes was when they saw that kind of that Google, when Google unveiled, what was it, like setting an appointment with a hairdresser.
Right? Yeah,
exactly right. God, I mean, like, guys, it's gonna happen. like welcome. And if it can do that good, like, then it means that the bots, I think what I'm really getting at, Andy, is that where the salesperson comes in is getting further and further down the intent process. Whereas I think what bots can do really well, not great today, but over the next few years we'll be able to do well, is just some of the basic stuff. So it's not the trust, the later stage intent. I've narrowed it down to 1 or 2 people. Now let's go. But it will be the like, hey, like help me to understand this or this. I gotcha. Right. And and you're going to want it in real time. I don't want to have to set up a call with you.
No, I agree.
It's absolutely brutal. I just went through a purchase. We just opened an office in Austin and I wanted to buy snacks. Okay. Snacks. Okay. Like I don't want to deal with this at all. Right. And instead of being able to go to this site, I had an SDR reach out and asked to set up a meeting with me about my snack needs. And then I had to call and I was like, no, I'm not meeting with you. Send me the pricing. I just like, I'll pick an option that I think, and then like, let's catch up later. And like in 2 weeks, and I can, if I need more, my office manager will order more. And then I had to call in with my credit card. And then I had a snack concierge put a time on my calendar a week later to talk about my snack needs. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, why can't I just give you my credit card? And I look, I mean, obviously look, I'm in this world, you're in this world. So we're just expecting less friction, and especially in those types of more transactional. And I think even at the enterprise level, some of that basic interaction, I tell that story because, there's just no reason why we wouldn't head toward this less friction. So I think the salesperson's value is going to come later in the process than maybe it does today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree 100%. I mean, I think that it speaks to the whole conversation about what is the role that we see now with a lot of inside sales teams, with BDRs, SDRs. It's always sort of been the ideas that when full automation, AI-informed automation, machine learning comes in, that, hey, those are the first roles to go.
No, I don't think so. I think, but they'll do something different. Meaning, and this goes back to it, like everything that you said, Andy. Like I agree 100%. But you're talking about the very like the top teams and reps. And if you look at what's actually coming out of most BDR teams, like I'm sorry, I can't automate that. Like I'm sorry, I can't. And SalesLoft, sent out a great report where they looked at if you do like I think it's 18% personalization leads to 2x results in replies. And if you don't think the bot's going to be able to get to 18%, you're wrong. Like,
of course they will, yeah.
And so I think that it goes back to my point. Say if you want to stay a BDR or SDR, you're going to have to be smarter. You can't just send out like blanketed emails or custom objects. You're going to have to really understand what real personalization is, and not necessarily it's an and you're going to have to figure out how to build kind of a unique, defensible, like thought leadership base of people that trust you. And I think that's what we're really going to see. And that's the big trend that I'm most excited about, is I think the role of salespeople is each salesperson. We're actually going to go back to your point from 30 years ago to where like the Rolodex matters again, because as we get pummeled in these various channels, people are going to be less likely to take people with, meetings with people that they don't know. And so if you kind of couple this with, I think the SDR and BDRs will still have a lot to do, but they're not going to be able to do what they did yesterday to be successful, or they're going to be gone. And what the other thing that they're going to have to be really, really good at is starting to build a Rolodex, right? As opposed to like building a trusted network of people who will take a meeting with you because you're adding value. And I know that like for a lot of us, we're like, yeah, Jake, it's a Rolodex. I'm like, well, yeah, but in today's day and age, like it's kind of a novel concept, right? Like what do you mean?
But here's the thing. So I'm a little contrarian on this whole thing.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
I would never have hired somebody on the basis of a Rolodex, because quite honestly, my experience has been over 4 decades in businesses that were built on relationships. We're selling oftentimes very expensive stuff that was in a small community, so you knew people. It just never transferred. Once you left a company and said, "Hey, I went to a competitor and knock on the door," and you're like a different human being. Yeah, you may know this person, but you're rebuilding that relationship, and you're either going to win that business on its own merits, not necessarily on who you know. Did it get you in the door? Yeah, maybe.
That's what I'm getting at.
But
that's what I'm getting at is I think to get in the door, that's going to be the battle. I feel like, again, if you look at the BDR, SDR's job, their job is to get in the door. Trust me, I know the exact salespeople you're talking about, and I know exactly. I think what I'm getting at is I trust the content Andy's putting out. I'll take a meeting. And that gets you the at bat, as opposed to I sent a cold email or I hit you up on LinkedIn. I think it'll be easier that way.
Yeah, but to some degree, though, you're talking about reconceptualizing the role. And because, the idea of frontline salespeople being thought leaders is one that most sales leaders still shun and shy away from.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting when you're talking about Rolodex. I think you're almost talking about a concept more akin to what like Keith Ferrazzi talks about in Never Eat Alone. If you've never ever read his books about building your network of value, that I think then really becomes important because it's not just based on something that you know a name, you've met them, you've handshook, maybe even sold them something, but these are people who you've provided value to, and which may be outside the context of work even, but it is your network, that your network really becomes a personal asset you carry with you.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think, well, think about it. What's happened to salespeople, you used to get a job in sales and you'd usually stay in that industry for a long time. Right? Like if you rewind to like the 80s, 90s, like that's what happened, right? You'd be, you work at GE for 20 years, some people, right?
Well, I mean, so I came of age in the Valley in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And it was actually, we were long duration compared to people today. We actually stayed someplace 2, sometimes even 3 years before we
Wow,
moved.
that's yeah. but I think the difference is like, they might've been in similar spaces. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. And I think that's the network that people are going to start to build, is that right now, people go from an HR software to business intelligence to a back-end database container company. And therefore there's no chance in hell that you are an expert in any, you know what I mean? So what I'm getting at is that I think in order to be successful, you're going to have to start to pick. Like again, where the salesperson's value used to be,
like that.
You used to be able to, you could go to these different jobs because you were executing this play, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, there's an SDR, they qualify, I demo and pitch you.
Right.
But if I don't need the qualify, I don't need the demo and pitch, what's the value you're really going to provide me? You've been selling in this space for a year, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, can I talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about?
Yeah. Hey, I think that's right on, actually. I hadn't really thought about that much in that term, so I like that thought because, if you are going to build a serious network, having longevity within an industry, and I think that there's always been a certain amount of reaching for the golden ring, right, or the brass ring, whatever. And so people tend to change jobs fairly frequently, especially more in the tech space, perhaps than others. But I think it's pretty constant in most industries these days. People sort of treat things the same. And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of value in building up your expertise is not necessarily your sales expertise. It's your industry expertise. It's your customer expertise.
Yes. Yeah, do you get me? It's empathy. It's empathy at the macro. It's, do you get me? Do you understand my world? Do you understand my space? Do you understand what I do? And I think, again, like there's a certain level of rep, that we've kind of referenced a few times, that look, I would not to like say I'm the best ever, but I think I'm able to pretty quickly shift and but it's more about like empathy. It's like I can really quickly relate and try to like genuinely understand what this person's going through. And just because of I have a very like diverse experience in terms of industries, like I can relate to a lot of different groups, but I think it's more of an outlier.
Yeah, I'd actually call that curiosity more than empathy.
I'm super curious. That's exactly right. I didn't know why I was good at sales until I realized it was that I was just like naturally very curious.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a point that certainly I've been hammering on recently in my show and everything that I'm doing is that curiosity as a fundamental requirement for the job from a personality standpoint. And the curiosity can be learned to some degree, but it's people who aren't curious are not going to make it in this business. And certainly you're not going to be able to stay in an industry if you're not curious, because if you're not curious, you're going to get bored and you're going to leave. I'm looking for that next thing. I love the rush of something new, it's sort of thrown on me, but people that sit in an industry, not sit in an industry, but stay in an industry and become masters at it, it's because they're curious. It's not because they're passive. It's just the opposite.
Yeah, and it's about and it's the person is curious, not the company is curious. And this goes back to my point from before about sales leaders and marketing leaders waking up that you have hundreds or thousands or however many salespeople on LinkedIn every single day that have an opportunity to do this. And, the thing I've been harping on a lot lately is how, almost every team I would say is using LinkedIn. Many sales teams, assuming that their buyers are there, right? There's certain industries where maybe LinkedIn's not as popular. And then I go to your profile and you talk about you made President's Club, dude. Do you think I care? Like, I'm a director of operations at Honeywell and you have an IoT product. You think I care that you're the top performing rep at your company and you went to President's Club 3 years in a row?
Or as you oftentimes see is, opened opportunities in. That's one that kills me. It's like, okay, you're connecting with me, and I get some salespeople, connect with me on something, and then I look at your LinkedIn profile. Basically, you're advertising you're looking for a job.
Everybody is. That's going to be the big shift on LinkedIn, and that's why I'm so bullish on this kind of idea of like building networks. Like, flag this. In 2 to 3 years, every single salesperson is going to rewrite their LinkedIn profile to talk about how they're an expert in the space that they serve, period. Every single person is going to change their online, of course, it's not an online resume, it's just what you've done. But instead,
heaven forbid that it's a resume.
You're reaching out to people on LinkedIn consistently. Then you go and you say people who viewed. And now they view your profile and you talk about how you won best places to work in Tuscaloosa. Like, do you think, that they care about your company propaganda? Do you think they care that you're the amazing? No, they care. Do you get my space? And so I think as LinkedIn is now becoming a place where people go, active users, I think go there. I think it's like 40% of them go there every day. As it becomes more of a way that you go and executives go to get their news and get professional. It's like the professional network,
Right.
You're going to have to change our way. But the cool part is, for going back to, the topic, which is around like SDRs and BDRs and what that means. That means if you're an SDR, BDR, and I decide, man, I'm really into this whole IoT thing, and I go and I work at, Microsoft or C3 IoT or Helium, one of these companies, and I just start to connect with these people. I start to share things about what's happening in IoT. And I do that again and again and again. And guess what? Month 10 of being an SDR, I've got, 300 directors of operations at different industrial manufacturing companies who interact with my content every 2 weeks. And I think it's just putting out like basic things, and marketing is going to have to enable their sales teams to push out that type of thought leadership, not push out our best places to work, award, not push out our ebook or white paper.
Right. So here's the base. What I see as sort of the fundamental challenge with that is that, thought leadership requires thought. And, one of the problems that I see from what I'm doing is that there's this real reluctance, and this is not pointing fingers at any generation or not, because it's always sort of been the case, is that, in sales, there's a very small subset of professional salespeople who are making that investment in terms of really learning their customers, really learning their craft, really investing their own time, perhaps even their own money to do this. And that's what you described really requires. And I think the people that make that investment, if they see themselves into the future, and I think one of the problems with SDRs now is they only see to the next job, right? I'm here 12 months and then there's the next job, I'm going to go. And they're not saying, where am I in 10 years, right? And what does 10 years look like? And what do I need to learn to get from here to there? What do I need to master to get from here to there? And to me, this is the big gap that we need to, as culturally in sales. And I think it's just the way people look at the profession is, we don't have continuing education requirements. We don't, have people really treat it as a profession. It's just treated as a job. And what you're describing, which is highly desirable, is really saying, this is a profession. Part of what my profession is, I am thinking about my customers and what I can do to serve them, and spending time on that and learning what I need to do to be able to help them better.
That's exactly right. It goes back to what I was talking about 20 minutes ago, which is it's just going to be required. Like who's
going to require it though?
The buyer. The buyer is going to require it. The buyer is not going to deal with it.
They've got this disconnect between the managers, right? Because most sales managers, they're not forcing their people to do this.
Yeah, most CROs, most VPs aren't.
No, and they sort of take the attitude, well, if I have to force them to do it, they're not going to do it. So, thus
then don't be mad when you're unemployed in 4 years. Like, don't be mad when you're at a customer. You know what I mean? Like, cool. You don't have to. Like, great. Like it is why like there will be, I mean, Andy, like it's going to happen, right? Like in 4 to 5 years, like there's going to be some shit's going to get real, like real. And
I agree 100%, by the way, but just
and I think what I'm trying to get at is that I hear you, and I don't think enough people are talking about it because it's easier, right, Andy? It's easier to just say, well, but Aaron Ross told me predictable revenue, if we just generate X amount of leads and X amount of this, and I'll just drive toward activity. And it's just that easy. And guess what? It's breaking now because we don't know how to judge influence in the process. What's the multi-touch whatever? And like we are using LinkedIn as a channel. How do you track the influence of LinkedIn? I just think the metrics are getting different. The buyers our behavior is changing, and sales is not caught up. And the technology, we need to understand how.
You read my article this morning.
Yes. I mean, because I think there's this understanding of it, but we're scared, right? As a sales leader, you're like, look, I've grown multiple teams to 120 million ARR or whatever it is, or 500 million ARR. And now, wait, you're telling me that that's not going to be successful. Well, I just got this huge, new job and equity. Like, you think I'm going to go run some new plays? No, I'm going to go run what got me here. And I think it's going to happen. And then everyone will go, oh yeah, like we've got to go do this whole new thing. And I don't know what it'll be called. It won't be called account-based everything or whatever it is, but there's going to be like the next term, which is around salespeople, like actually having to add real value. And that if you can't add value to the equation versus execute a play, like, I'm sorry, like that's where the bot's going to replace you. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting conversation because again, this is a drum I've been beating for a long time, but it was the fact of life for me in my sales career. I mean,
yeah, I know. I mean, for a lot of people it is, but I mean, Andy, I don't know how many like demos you've taken recently or sales teams. Like, it's not what's happening, man. Like whenever I learned the craft, kind of in the mid to early 2000s, it was, again, maybe it was a curiosity, whatever. I just indexed that way. But now, but these roles didn't, necessarily, it wasn't, SDR, sales, account management, customer success, right? It was like, you kind of like did a little bit of everything. So
the playbook will change. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean,
the playbook has to change.
So many people use predictable revenue as a Bible, and it's served many companies well, to a degree.
It was written 10 years ago.
No more, almost 15.
Yeah, 15 years ago. And we're running plays from. Do you know what existed?
Wait. Existed. Sales. I just had this conversation with somebody I interviewed right before you came on, which is, we're running sales fundamentally the same way it's been run for over 100 years, and so the mechanics of how we do sales may have changed, but the way we measure take quota. Yeah, I'm of the belief, and I've on record with this, I think quota is an absolutely useless measure of performance, and productivity. But we've been using it since Lord knows when, 1890s probably, when modern American selling started. We need to start reevaluating all the metrics we use, all the ways we manage people, evaluate people, assess actual productivity, which we do have. No one measures productivity today the way it's actually meant to be measured. So, I think we're at a moment in sales where a real rethink of the paradigms, as we talked about, really important.
It's going to be required. I mean, Andy, like I said, it's just going to be required, and it's cool. Like if you don't, again, and like maybe I think it's going to be, it's for the best, right? I think we're going to work. It's going to be treated, like to your point, more of a profession because there's going to be true expertise that exists. Because if you don't have knowledge, if you don't have a certain level of knowledge, then you're going to, yes, of course the bots are going to be able to do most of what you do.
I'll say it a different way. What I'd say is, if you don't have knowledge, but if you don't have wisdom, because bots and AI can replicate your knowledge, but they can't replicate your wisdom. And it's that, that insight perspective, the thing you bring as a human that's integrating the knowledge, the empathy, the curiosity, that's what's really going to set you apart.
Yeah, I think we're going to be really shocked at what bots are going to be able to do in 5 years.
I'm not shocked at all. But I think they're going to anybody that underestimates, there's a famous law about technology. A guy named Roy Amara, who was a futurist at Stanford, he's unfortunately passed away, but coined this law that said, we overestimate the impact of a technology in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term. And I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I love it.
That everybody's cycling bots and going, oh, but it's like, just wait. In 5-10 years, the impacts will be very, very big. But to the point I was just making is I think the mastering the ability to be human and to add value in a human way in the era of AI, in the era of bots, is going to be the true differentiator. And those people who can do that will thrive. Those who can't will be looking elsewhere. That's exactly right. And I think it does start, to your point, with the SVP, the CRO levels, that we've got to stop just focusing 100% of our reps' time on monthly. I think this is your point around KPIs and quotas too. I think this is maybe what you're getting at, is you ask your team to dedicate 100% of their time to hitting a month or a quarter. And so it goes back to, why aren't more reps doing this on building more thought leadership, et cetera? Well, because my boss doesn't see any value in me trying to build my career for the midterm. I mean, and I say midterm, I'm talking like 6 months or a year from now to make my life easier. I'm not even talking about a long term here, that we're not giving reps 10 or 15% of their day to do activities that are going to then position them to crush it in like a year. Mm-hmm. And it's because we've become so short-sighted, and we're private. Most of these companies are private. It's a fake pressure. You know what I mean? Like, you're not public. Like, you're not reporting. I mean, you're reporting earnings to your VC probably, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that whatever that amount of time is, I've a huge believer that you need to set aside time to learn every day. And this is part of what you're talking to in terms of making investments in something beyond just the short term. And for this show, I've interviewed, entrepreneurs who are privately held startup companies, high growth companies that are setting aside, half hour a day for everybody to stop. Work stops, everybody learns. And, when I talk about that to most VPs of sales, especially in tech, they're horrified by the thought. Absolutely horrified. And it's like, well, first of all, the research is pretty clear. Survey after survey done for decades is that reps don't spend any more than 35% of their time actually engaging with customers. You have the time during the day, but it makes the senior manager so nervous, this thought that somebody's complete attention may not be focused on.
I have to get my MQLs right now. I got to get my SQLs right now. I need more activity. It's so funny. I mean, obviously, look, we work with hundreds of companies every year at a wide variety of different stages, from companies with thousands of salespeople to 20 or some even less. And we cannot get over volume. I mean, I see it in sales leader after sales leader after sales leader. They cannot let go of volume. We have to let go. Like, it is about effectiveness, not volume. Volume is an important thing to look at, but not the. And I mean, it's like does not compute. When we have these conversations about what if we tracked meaningful conversations as the first step, as opposed to any other activities. Mm-hmm. No, can't do it. Can't do it. We have to track calls, activities. Like, fine, sure, whatever.
And I think this is the point we started the conversation, which is that for many leaders who might not otherwise have done this, the availability of the technology, giving them the visibility into this level of activity that they didn't have before, is unfortunately encouraging this bad behavior.
Well, yeah, because we're not. Yeah, you're right. Because what we're doing is we're trying to we're trying to adapt the technology to our process, as opposed to figure out how to create like a better process and have the technology to enable it. We're just trying to say, cool, now I can do more. This sales engagement. I mean, obviously, look, we've done hundreds of sales engagement, overhauls or implementations. So I think we know more about this space than I would argue anyone except the companies that are actually building the software, and we've got to start to view these are workflow management tools. They're not email tools, but most people, they still think they're email or call tools. It's like, no, it's just a workflow.
Right.
It just allows you to create a workflow that the sales team can then execute against, and we can track it and we can optimize it. But instead, whenever most teams, when they made these purchases, they didn't view it as a workflow tool. They viewed it as a way to do more, as opposed to, and hopefully be more effective in the process. But it's just that we can't get away from this more mentality. And that's my point. Guess what? The bots can do more better than any of us can.
Absolutely. If it's all about more, the bots will do it way more. And the thought of doing things better is just absent, unfortunately, from most sales leaders, at least the ones I've been engaging with recently, is like, and I tell the story all the time about this, CRO that I spoke to, that, his idea for growth was all about more at the top of the funnel and nothing about more at the bottom of the funnel. Right? It wasn't like,
but don't you but look, the book says if we get X number of leads.
Well, I know, but the technology enables that behavior.
It just all works out. Well, yeah. Well, it shouldn't, though. The technology wasn't maybe it was originally, because here's the thing too. This is the other thing that nobody, I don't think, talks about enough. Back in 2014, 2015, 2016, when these tools are relatively new, you could just send a bunch of emails and book meetings, and it was like awesome. And guess what? That's exactly what you should have done in 2014, 2015, 2016. Fast forward to 2018, 2019. And guess what? Now that everyone's doing it, it doesn't work anymore. Now we got to go find something else. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think the problem is we're still looking back at the days of 2016 when I knew my emails was 2017. We made an early investment in those tools, and they haven't changed the playbook. They haven't realized like, oh yeah, that was cool. That worked for a while. And now it's not. So we got to go do, I don't know, whatever the next cool thing is,
Well, yeah. And I'll sort of wrap up, because unfortunately we're running a little long, but it's been a fun conversation, is the bridge, I think, for tools companies that they have to sort of span, the gap they have to span is, okay, everything you're doing is about sales. So what are you doing to help the buyer make a decision? I mean, there's some of that's taking place with some of the sales enablement, but most of these engagement platforms and so on, it's just as the buyers perceive it. It's all about me, the seller. And it's not about them, the buyer. And until they can span that gap, I think that also is a critical issue.
Exactly right. That's right. It's always been about the buyer, right? And your efficiency comes second to the buyer, like the ideal buyer journey.
Yeah.
And I think, and as the buyer's behavior changes, as sales leaders and people in this world, we have to change too. And it's going to be required. Or again, don't be upset in 5 years when you're like, I miss the good old days, Jake, whenever it was about the people and the relationships, and I could take old Hank out to steak dinners. Like, cool. In some industries, it's still going to work, but in other industries, buyers want something different. Yeah, and I think we've got to adapt.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about that specifically in my first book I published 7 years ago, which is those days were done then. I mean, it's, don't bother me. Don't take me to lunch. Just give me the information I need to help me make a decision. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Well, Jake, fantastic talking to you.
Awesome, man. I enjoyed it.
How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. It's Jake Dunlap on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. We're doing a lot of stuff. We're firm believers that we think that Instagram is also a great platform for people to engage. So you can find me there, Jake_Dunlap_. And then check us out at Skaled, SKALED.com, where you can stay up to date on sales and marketing trends and hear me rant and talk about the future, the exciting future of sales.
Excellent. Okay. You didn't even rant today. You did a great job. All right. Thanks, Jake.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for the week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for joining me. I also want to thank my guest, Jake Dunlap. Now, join me again next week. We've got a great show coming. My welcoming is my guest, the New York Times bestselling author, Daniel Pink. Now, Dan's latest book is titled When: The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And we're going to talk about the science behind timing in sales and the importance of timing in sales. When's the optimal time to prospect during the day? When should you do your discovery calls? Perhaps when should you do your qualification? I mean, there's a science behind all of this. You can learn this and put this to use in sales, really to help improve your performance. So you don't want to miss this conversation. That'll be next week with Dan Pink. Now, before you go, don't forget to check out thesaleshouse.com/sales plan. Again, where you can download the overview of the sales plan I've personally used over the past 30 years in a really successful career. Make sure you check that out. So thanks again for joining me. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.